You step through the shadowed gates of Topkapı Palace, and for a moment the marble seems to glow with the last orange of sunset. The air carries a faint perfume of roses, yet beneath it something heavier lingers, like the smell of old incense that never quite fades. You're walking across polished courtyards where every stone has heard secrets it cannot repeat. Secrets about brides who entered with jewelled veils and left as little more than political pawns. And here's the unsettling part. You probably won't survive this. Not the disease, not the poisons, not the silences that swallow screams whole. Still, the palace doors open wide, welcoming you like a gilded cage pretending to be paradise. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. I love imagining the glow of your phone in some distant city, maybe on a night as sleepless as this one. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're ushered deeper, past courtyards with fountains murmuring, as though trying to drown out the palace's own gossip. The princesses who walked these paths once lived lives painted in gold leaf for official records, yet the reality was stitched with dread. Imagine embroidered slippers brushing cold tile floors while their hearts raced ahead of them, already pacing the bridal chamber. Ottoman chroniclers wrote about these women with careful precision, cataloguing their dowries, their alliances, their marriages, but leaving out the one thing that mattered most: the silence of their fear. Because here's the truth, Topkapı wasn't just a palace. It was a stage where women were displayed like rare tapestries. The court's historians bragged about opulence, silk brocades from Venice, diamonds cut in India, and spices thickening the air. But behind every luxury you sense the unspoken rule: beauty was armour, yet also a leash. You may imagine yourself as one of these princesses, dressed in layers of silk heavy enough to weigh down your very breath. Yet beneath it, you're just another bargaining chip, waiting to be moved across the empire's chessboard. There's a quirky little detail that often slips into footnotes: the palace cats. They padded through these same halls, their soft paws a reminder that even in gilded captivity, something could move freely. Some say the princesses envied them, whispering that the cats lived better than the women who stroked their fur. It sounds almost comical, till you picture a bride-to-be brushing her hand along a purring creature, knowing that the animal could slip into the shadows while she could not. Historians still argue whether the women of Topkapı were pampered beyond imagining or trapped in unbearable isolation. Both might be true. You can picture how the silence at night magnified every thought, every doubt. The rustle of a curtain became a warning. The clink of a key turning in a lock sounded like destiny itself. This wasn't just a palace of luxury. It was a labyrinth of control. As you walk further, the lamps flicker on, throwing golden halos against the tiled walls. Calligraphy curls across the ceilings, reminding you of the divine order, yet even scripture couldn't soften the dread of what lay ahead. The wedding night loomed like a shadow no veil could cover, and though the official chronicles wrote of duty and devotion, the walls themselves carried another truth. Here, every bride stepped into her chamber, knowing that her future might be woven from fear as much as silk. You find yourself led past the imperial gardens, where cypress trees stand like silent witnesses, tall and unmoving, as if they've been forced to watch centuries of royal theatre. Their roots know what you're about to discover: that in the Ottoman dynasty, even the princes themselves were prisoners of velvet and silk. The palace is hushed, but if you listen closely you can almost hear it. The faint echo of footsteps behind locked doors, the sound of men pacing endlessly inside chambers not much bigger than a modern studio apartment. You'd expect a prince brother to the future sultan to live freely, but instead he sits among cushions, staring at jewelled tiles, waiting for his fate to be decided by politics he cannot control. This was the infamous cafes, the key, where royal brothers were confined so they wouldn't plot against the reigning sultan. Sounds absurd: velvet cushions, endless servants, trays of sherbet and sweetmeats. Yet freedom cut away slice by slice. Imagine being raised with a tutor teaching you poetry, law and warcraft, only to end up locked away, more ornament than man. And here's where it starts to feel eerily familiar for the princesses. Their lives too became soft prisons, wrapped not in iron bars but in obligations. The women who watched their brothers live in gilded isolation knew deep down that their own fate was tied to another kind of cage, the bridal bed. There's a quirky detail that makes you smile in a bitter way. Some princes in the cage grew addicted to pigeons. They kept birds in delicate wooden cages inside their rooms, breeding through them, feeding them, talking to them like old friends. On the surface it looks charming, a lonely young man pouring his affection into a fluttering pet. But scratch deeper, and you see the mirror. He was just another bird in a larger cage, wings clipped by dynastic survival. And his sisters, trailing silks down the palace corridors, could not ignore that reflection. They knew that for them, the door of their cage opened not into freedom, but into a wedding chamber where every move was watched, judged, remembered. Historians still argue whether the kafes system protected the dynasty from chaos or destroyed the spirit of its princes. Some say it produced timid, indecisive rulers who never knew a world beyond gilded bars. Others claim it was the only way to prevent endless fratricide. But what no one argues is the atmosphere it created, an empire where fear was built into family life. If princes were treated this way, what chance did the women have? You can feel that dread weaving into the fabric of their lives, each thread a reminder that love, choice, and safety were luxuries they would never hold. And here's the thing, the women saw the cage not as distant but as warning. Brothers locked away in luxury were not so different from sisters promised in marriage. Both were pawns moved by the Sultan's hand. A princess might be offered like a jewelled box to a governor, a vizier, or an allied ruler, her body the signature sealing a fragile peace. The lesson of the cage was simple. No one in this palace lived for themselves. Not men, not women, not even the ones born into velvet. As you pass beneath a vaulted archway, the lamps cast long shadows across the tiles. They look almost like bars. You glance at them, realizing that in this world cages didn't need iron. They could be woven from silks, embroidered with gold and locked with duty. And somewhere, as the night deepens, you can hear the faint beat of your own heart echoing the dread of both brothers and sisters, each locked in their own quiet prison. You keep moving deeper into the palace's web of corridors, and the air grows heavier. Not with smoke or candle wax this time, but with the weight of negotiation. You realize now that every princess here is less a daughter, and more a document. You don't belong to yourself. You are parchment, ink and seal, the marriage treaty written in flesh and breath. The empire stretched across 3 continents, but it didn't hold together by armies alone. It held because women like you were offered as bridges, between provinces, between rival families, between ambition and survival. Your hand wasn't just given, it was traded, like a jewel passed between rulers. The irony makes you laugh softly, though the sound feels bitter in your throat. You are dressed in fabrics brought from Venice, spices carried across deserts, pearls fished from oceans. Everything on your body is global, stitched from conquest, and now you too are part of the trade routes. One historian described Ottoman princesses as living treaties, a phrase that feels poetic at first, until you realize what it means. Your wedding night is not yours. It belongs to the empire. It is an event that echoes far beyond the locked doors of your chamber, rippling out into tax policies, alliances, rebellions paused or prevented. You are the soft veil covering sharp politics. Quirky little details peek through, though, as they always do. Dowries weren't just money and land. They sometimes included entire households of servants, dozens of jewel-encrusted garments, even rare parrots or exotic monkeys shipped from distant colonies. Imagine stepping into your bridal chamber with a caged bird as part of your luggage. There's something almost comical in the image, yet you know that for the bride there was nothing funny about it. Even the pets were symbols of her wealth, her role, her burden. Historians still argue whether Ottoman princesses enjoyed more autonomy than their European counterparts. Some suggest they had unusual influence, commanding estates and sometimes even negotiating their own terms. Others counter that their power was merely ornamental, tolerated only as long as it served the Sultan. The truth, as always, lies in the shadows between. You may be granted jewels, lands, even the right to administer taxes in far-off provinces, but none of it erases the fear of tonight, the chamber where all those gifts and titles will be stripped away, where you are left simply as body. And make no mistake, the men you were promised to didn't always want you. Sometimes you were resented, a constant reminder of the Sultan's watchful eye. Other times you were envied, because marrying a princess meant both fortune and risk. If you pleased her brother, your star rose. If you faltered, your head might roll before the bedding sheets cooled. That tension made the bridal chamber less a sanctuary and more a courtroom. Imagine lying there, silks twisted around your limbs, knowing every word, every sigh, every sequence could ripple outward to change a man's career, or end it. As you drift down another corridor in this palace of whispers, you can almost feel the walls pressing closer. It's not the jewelled lamps or the calligraphy reminding you of God's order that frighten you. It's the realization that the Empire doesn't see you as person. You are a signature. You are currency. You are a fragile parchment that must not tear. And soon, on your wedding night, someone will try to test just how strong or fragile you really are. The day of your bridal procession arrives, and the palace awakens with a kind of fever. From the outside, it looks like triumph, a glittering parade designed to dazzle the city. Trumpets sound, carpets are unrolled across cobblestones, and a crowd gathers to see you pass. You're seated high upon a litter draped in brocade, your veil heavy with pearls that tug against your scalp, your hands hidden inside silk gloves so fine they feel like second skin. To the people watching, you look like a painting come to life, a perfect vision of Ottoman magnificence. But inside that veil, your face burns and your stomach knots in ways no one can see. The paradox of this procession is almost cruel. Every detail is meant to demonstrate joy. Flowers tossed, musicians playing, torches lighting the road at dusk. Yet your own body trembles beneath the silks. You're supposed to embody serenity, the dutiful daughter offering herself for the glory of the empire. But each step of the camel beneath you, each roll of the wheels carrying your dowry chest, feels like a drumbeat towards something you cannot name aloud. The cheering crowds don't hear the sound of your heartbeat, hammering in time with the horse's hooves. There's a quirky tradition tucked into this grand display. Sometimes the princess's dowry was paraded separately in carved wooden chests, each overflowing with silks, coins, and jewels. Crowds whispered about which chest held which treasures, pointing out one box rumoured to contain perfumes so rare their scent could cling to stone for weeks. To the onlookers, it was entertainment. To you, it was humiliation. Because while the Empire displayed your wealth, it also reminded you that you were the most valuable object in this entire parade. Historians still argue whether these processions were empowering for the princess or degrading. Some claim they gave her visibility, making her more than a shadow locked away in the harem. Others counter that visibility only heightened her vulnerability, turning her into spectacle. The truth, once again, lies in contradiction. A woman adored and admired in public, then silenced and stripped of choice in private. That's the part no official chronicler cared to record, the way her silk veil absorbed her tears as she tried to smile on cue. And then comes the silence. After the drums fade and the torches dim, after the crowds disperse, you are carried across a threshold few dare to describe. The palace walls swallow you again. Only this time they are not your childhood home. They belong to your husband, or worse, to his household, which now becomes your prison. The music outside is replaced by whispers behind doors, the hush of attendants padding barefoot across carpets, the creak of locks sliding into place. The golden glow of the procession evaporates, leaving you in a chamber where shadows stretch long, and your fear grows longer still. You sit, surrounded by attendants who adjust your veil, reapply your kohl, smooth the folds of your gown. Their touch is gentle, yet their silence speaks louder than words. Everyone knows what comes next, but no one says it aloud. That's the unspoken cruelty. The grandeur of the day funnels into this moment of trembling quiet. You are a princess, a daughter of sultans, but here now you're also just a girl waiting for a door to open. And in that silence, surrounded by candlelight and perfumes that feel suffocating instead of sweet, you realize that all the power of the Empire cannot shield you from the terror of your own wedding night. The door closes behind you with a sound that seems too final for a wedding chamber. The walls glow with candlelight, flickers bouncing across blue and gold tiles, as though the patterns themselves are watching. The air is heavy with rosewater, musk and frankincense sweet enough to choke. You've been told this is the most important night of your life, yet it feels more like a trial staged in secret. The bed sits in the centre like a throne draped in embroidered silk, pillows stacked so high they could bury you. And as you sit there, veiled and motionless, You realise that every flicker of the candle reminds you of whispers passed through the harem. Stories of screams behind locked doors, of brides who emerged pale and broken, of those who didn't emerge at all. You remember them now? In this silence. Women who tried to warn you with glances, with half-spoken words tucked inside laughter, with small embroidered messages hidden in hems and veils. Be still. Don't resist. Pray. Advice passed like contraband between women who had no power except to prepare each other for what came next. In the official chronicles, your wedding night will be described as a sacred union, celebrated by the empire. But the walls carry the truth. This is not romance. This is survival. There's a peculiar, almost absurd ritual attached to this moment. Attendants sometimes inspected the chamber beforehand, adjusting the sheet, laying out a ceremonial robe, even ensuring the bedclothes were pale enough to show stains. It sounds clinical, almost bureaucratic. Imagine eunuchs and midwives whispering about the colour of linen while you sit there, heart pounding, trying not to faint. To them, it's procedure. To you, it's a countdown. Historians still argue whether these tales of brutality were the norm or rare exceptions. Some point to evidence of affectionate marriages, moments where princesses seemed to find happiness or at least companionship. Others emphasise the sheer imbalance of power, the way even kindness was laced with coercion. Because refusal was never an option. Both versions linger, leaving you trapped in uncertainty. Will your husband be gentle, or will he treat you as nothing more than his right, his proof of conquest? The dread of not knowing is its own torment. You glance at the window, but it's shuttered tight. The air feels trapped, just like you. Outside, the city sleeps, unaware that its stability rests on what happens in this room. The procession, the chests of treasure, the trumpets and torches, they've all led here to a single bed. And in this moment, you see the cruel joke. For all the power of the Ottoman dynasty, for all the wars and treaties and riches, it narrows down to whether a frightened bride can endure the night. You fold your hands in your lap, fingers twisting in silk, and listen to the silence. It's not just absence of sound, it's weight pressing against your chest. Somewhere in that silence you hear echoes, other brides who sat where you sit, staring at the same candlelight, whispering prayers into the same suffocating air. And as the door creaks open, letting in the figure who will decide the rest of your life, you realise that you are not alone. You are part of a long, unbroken line of women who feared this night more than death itself. The chamber doesn't stay private for long. You may have thought this night would at least belong to you and your new husband, but in the Ottoman palace, even intimacy is a public act. Not because the doors are left wide open, but because shadows are always watching. Eunuchs hover beyond the curtains, attendants whisper just outside, and midwives wait with practiced patience, ready to be summoned inside at the faintest sound. Their role isn't to protect you, it's to record you. Every sigh, every silence, every stain upon the bedclothes will be measured and reported, as though the empire itself has a right to your body's secrets. It's one of the strangest contradictions of Ottoman life. A world obsessed with modesty, yet endlessly intrusive in the most private moments. Even now you can picture the attendants discussing it afterward, in clip tones, almost like accountants. The union was successful. The sheet bore proof, cold words to confirm that your flesh has fulfilled its political duty. Imagine lying there, pulse still racing, and knowing that by morning gossip will ripple through the palace, faster than smoke rising from a brazier. There's a quirky little custom tied to this surveillance, and it feels almost absurd in its bluntness. In some courts, a red ribbon was hung outside the chamber once consummation was confirmed, a signal to servants and courtiers that the bride had been properly delivered. To the household, it was a mark of celebration. To you, it would feel like a flag of surrender, raised on your behalf whether you consented or not. Historians still argue whether the presence of witnesses and inspectors was exaggerated in later accounts, meant to scandalise or dramatise the Ottoman court. Some insist it was standard practice. Others claim it only occurred in exceptional unions of high political value. But whether constant or occasional, the fear of it was real. You don't need proof to imagine how the mere rumour of being watched would haunt every bride who stepped into that chamber. Even if the door stayed closed, her mind was already filled with the sound of unseen footsteps, the possibility of intrusion. And then there's the husband himself, caught between his role as man and as political actor. Perhaps he feels pressure too, the knowledge that failure would be whispered about by eunuchs, judged by ministers, and most dangerously reported to the Sultan. In that sense, he's also trapped, his performance measured as much as yours. But here's the difference. If he falters, he may be mocked. If you falter, you may be punished. The imbalance sharpens every movement, turning what should be tenderness into theatre. You lie still, trying to control your breathing, your palms slick despite the cool air. You wonder if the candle is burning lower, or if time has simply stretched into a cruel trick. You know that by dawn, strangers will discuss this night as though they were here in the room, dissecting details you wish you could forget. And perhaps they will laugh or speculate or weave your body into rumours that will linger long after you've been reduced to another name in the chronicles. The irony presses on you. This night is supposed to mark the beginning of your adult life, yet it feels like the end of something far more precious, your privacy, your selfhood, your illusion of safety. Every flicker of light, every shifting shadow reminds you that nothing you do here belongs to you. And as you finally close your eyes, not to rest but to endure, you realise that your silence itself has been claimed by the Empire, recorded and remembered long after the candles burn out. Long after the candles sputter out, the chamber still holds echoes, your breath, your heartbeat, the silence that followed. But if you lean in close, if you listen past the official accounts, you can still hear the ghosts of women who came before you. Ottoman princesses may have been forbidden to write their fears plainly, but they found ways to speak. A scrap of embroidery stitched with crooked patterns that only another woman would understand. A poem written in delicate Persian couplets, whose metaphors of cold nights and silent roses concealed confessions no chronicler dared to record. Even a casual song hummed by attendants, carrying a line or two that whispered warnings across generations. Their words slipped through the cracks of censorship like smoke under a locked door. One of the strangest fragments comes from a court record describing how a princess gifted her niece a pillow embroidered with tulips that bled into thorns. To most eyes it was simply decoration. To those who knew, it was code, beauty hides pain. Another left behind verses about the curtain that falls and the voice that fails, which scholars now puzzle over, debating whether it was about death, faith, or simply the terror of being silenced in the bridal chamber. The Empire censored what it could, but fear has a way of surviving in symbols. There's a quirky detail too. Some brides wrote their anxieties into talismans. Small folded papers inscribed with protective verses, sewn secretly into hems or pillow corners. They weren't supposed to need protection on their wedding night, yet here they were, clinging to charms against demons both literal and human. To touch one of these amulets today is to feel the weight of centuries of whispered dread, folded and hidden with care. Historians still argue whether these fragments of poetry and embroidery should be read as personal confessions or simply as the stylized art of the court. Ottoman culture was steeped in metaphor, where a rose could mean beauty, passion, or danger depending on who held the needle or the pen. But the consistency of these symbols, the recurring images of night, silence, thorns and blood, jest that the women were telling truths that no male chronicler would dare write outright. As you walk the corridors in your imagination, you can almost feel them beside you, sisters, cousins, mothers, all carrying their own burden of dread. They may not have spoken openly, but their fear was etched into fabric, pressed into paper, carried in song. To read it now is to glimpse the underside of the Empire, the part the official scrolls try to erase, and you realise that even when silenced, these women refuse to vanish entirely. The irony is sharp. The Empire prided itself on chronicling everything, from battles to taxes to the exact shade of marble in a fountain. Yet the truest stories, the trembling of a bride's hand, the tears hidden in her veil, were never written down. Instead, they were smuggled forward in the private language of women, waiting for you to hear them centuries later. And as you imagine yourself standing in the candlelit chamber, fingers tracing the edge of embroidered tulips that bleed into thorns, you realise you are reading the diary these women were never allowed to keep. The whispers left behind by earlier brides are still in your ears as you lie beneath the heavy canopy of your chamber, but the stories they carried are far from uniform. Some women murmured that their husbands were unexpectedly kind, offering gentleness instead of conquest, turning what they feared into something tolerable, maybe even tender. Others told darker tales of nights that ended in bruises or silence, where a husband treated his bride less like a partner and more like a seal of ownership. The truth is muddied, blurred by centuries of secrecy. For every account that speaks of affection, another suggests violence. And the uncertainty is its own kind of torture. You can't prepare for what you don't know. Will the night be a balm or a battle? The paradox is clear. You are at once the most honoured woman in the empire and also the most vulnerable. Your rank, your jewels, your wealth, they all vanish in that locked room. There, you are no more powerful than a servant girl. Maybe less, because the servant could at least run. You, however, must lie still and endure, because fleeing would mean dishonouring the dynasty. Imagine that contradiction pressing into your chest like the weight of those pearl-laden veils. And yet, amid the shadows, some stories tilt toward the absurd. One chronicle describes how a new husband, nervous and inexperienced, called for a physician midway through his wedding night, panicking that he was cursed. The physician, too embarrassed to intervene, prescribed warm milk and a prayer. To the bride, the night was terrifying. To the court, it became gossip. That absurdity doesn't erase the fear. It only deepens it, because even your suffering could become entertainment. Historians still argue whether Ottoman brides were more likely to encounter tenderness or terror. The accounts are so contradictory that it's impossible to pin down. Some point to letters suggesting that a few women developed genuine partnerships, becoming confidants and advisors to their husbands. Others highlight the fragments of embroidery, the talismans, the coded poems, evidence that dread was never far away. Perhaps the truth is that both existed side by side. The unpredictability was what made the night unbearable. Fear thrives in uncertainty. You picture the chamber again, the flicker of candlelight, the faint draught stirring the silks, the muffled footsteps beyond the door. Every detail sharpens your awareness that the night can swing either way. Maybe the man who enters will offer a hand with patience. Maybe he'll demand proof of dominance. And you can do nothing but wait. It's that waiting, that powerless anticipation that becomes the real punishment. And in that suspended moment you realise something darker. The Empire didn't care which version unfolded. Whether you found tenderness or terror, what mattered was that the union was sealed, that the sheet bore proof, that the gossip confirmed your obedience. Your feelings were irrelevant. Your pain, your relief, your serah, it all belonged to someone else. You were a vessel, not a voice. And as the candles burn lower, you finally understand why the women before you left their warnings hidden in poems and stitches. They knew the night could bring anything, and that uncertainty was what made it truly unbearable. By now, you understand that fear was not just endured, it was repurposed. Ottoman princesses, like so many women in history, learned to bend dread into something useful. Some turned their wedding nights into opportunities, reading the trembling in their husbands' voices, the stiffness in their movements, and realizing that he too carried burdens of expectation. If he feared failure, you could soothe him, positioning yourself not just as wife but as confidant. If he desired power, you could flatter him, presenting yourself as ally. In this delicate dance, survival meant calculation, knowing when to appear fragile, when to be strong, when to remain silent, when to whisper in his ear like a soft echo guiding his choices. The stories of women who mastered this game ripple faintly through history. One princess, married off to a powerful vizier, supposedly used her influence in the bedchamber to sway provincial appointments, nudging her allies into key posts. Another is remembered for feigning illness on her wedding night, delaying consummation long enough to force her husband into concessions. It's hard to know whether these tales are embroidered legend or fragments of truth, but they reveal a shared belief. The wedding night could be a trap, but it could also be a turning point. Even the small details tell you how women weaponized fear. Quirky examples slip through. Gifts of scented oils or silks sent strategically to soften a husband's temper, or carefully timed prayers whispered aloud so that the chamber felt watched by heaven itself. Imagine lying there, palms open, eyes closed, reciting verses in a steady voice, not only as comfort but as subtle shield, reminding the man beside you that God might be listening. Fear transformed into armour, stitched invisibly into every gesture. Historians still argue whether these princesses truly held influence, or whether later stories exaggerated their roles to make sense of unexplained political shifts. Some scholars insist that their husbands wielded absolute authority, that any whispers of female power were merely rumours woven by jealous courtiers. Others, however, point to estates managed by princesses, petitions signed in their names, and subtle patterns in provincial politics that suggest their hand at work. The debate lingers like smoke, but what cannot be denied is that these women survived, and survival itself in a palace designed to silence them was already a form of power. You picture it now, a bride stepping into her chamber, knees trembling, but mind already calculating. Every glance at her husband becomes a question. Can he be softened? Can he be guided? Can he be endured? The chamber is no longer just a prison, it's a chessboard, and every move matters. If she plays well, she emerges not only alive but influential. If she falters, she may be forgotten, or worse, remembered only as a name in a list of failed unions. And so you begin to see the quiet genius of these women. They didn't erase their fear, they carried it, shaped it, wielded it like a hidden blade. The empire demanded obedience, but in the shadows of the bridal chamber, obedience often became strategy. And in that strategy, some princesses found a path not only to endure, but to bend the empire's gaze, if only slightly, in their foe. Centuries pass in the blink of a candle flame, yet the echoes of those nights never truly vanish. The official histories tried to bury them under lists of dowries and treaties, under polished tales of imperial splendour. Chroniclers wrote carefully about alliances forged, lands exchanged, processions glittering like rivers of gold, but they left out the trembling in a young woman's hands, the prayers whispered into embroidered pillows. And yet, if you lean close enough to the cracks, their voices seep through. They live in the margins, in the poems where roses bleed, in the lullabies that linger on thorns instead of petals, in the faded stitches that speak louder than ink. What is striking isn't just what was hidden, but why. The fear of Ottoman princesses was not considered fit for history because it disrupted the myth of control. If brides trembled, if they resisted, if they carried talismans against their own wedding nights, then the empire itself seemed fragile. So their voices were censored, wrapped in silence for 600 years. But silence is never perfect. Somewhere in a dusty archive a line of poetry breaks through. Somewhere in a song a warning slips past. Their fears survive because fear has a way of refusing erasure. Quirky fragments surface like driftwood from a storm. One tale tells of a princess who demanded her bridal chamber be flooded with lamps, refusing to lie in darkness. Another supposedly smeared pomegranate juice on her sheets before the attendants inspected them, an act of defiance disguised as compliance. These slivers, whether fact or fable, reveal something more than fear. They reveal ingenuity, resilience, and the stubborn will of women determined to leave some mark on a history that tried to forget them. Historians still argue whether these traces represent widespread truths or isolated incidents. Were Ottoman princesses universally terrified of their wedding nights, or only some? Were they voiceless victims or subtle strategists who carved out power where they could? The debate continues, unresolved, reminding you that history itself is often as censored and uncertain as the bridal chamber. But the persistence of these fragments proves one thing: their fears mattered, and they still matter now. As you let the vision fade, you picture the palace again, the tiled corridors, the flickering lamps, the silent chambers where brides once waited. The empire that demanded their silence has long since crumbled, yet their whispers remain. They speak not only of dread but of survival, of resilience stitched into silk, of courage hidden in trembling hands. And in hearing them, you realise they were never truly erased. The night was feared, yes, but it did not consume them entirely. Their shadows still walk these halls, waiting for you to listen. And now, as the last candle burns low, let the weight of these centuries settle gently around you. The palace fades, the tiled walls soften, the silks unravel into mist. You no longer need to carry the dread of those brides, nor the silence that followed them. Let the echoes grow distant, like footsteps disappearing down a marble corridor. You are safe here, in your own space, far from the chambers and the watchers, far from the bargains struck in whispers. Breathe slowly, deeply, feel the rhythm of your chest steadying, each breath softer than the last. Imagine the veils lifting, not heavy with pearls, but light as air, drifting upwards into the night. Above you the stars shimmer, without judgment, without expectation, without fear. They shine the same way they did over Topkapı centuries ago, but here they belong only to you. Let your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts loosen, and your body sink into rest. The stories have been told, the whispers heard, and the fears acknowledged. Nothing more is required of you. Only stillness, only calm. Sleep now, wrapped not in silk or duty, but in peace.